Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into a topic that sits right at the heart of our modern society.
Yeah, it's definitely one that gets pretty complex pretty fast.
Absolutely. We're talking about the fascinating and often thorny intersection of technology and free speech.
Right.
We've spent time with some really excellent source material here, notes and slides from a University of Victoria computer science course, SEM 401. It's all about social and professional issues in technology and free speech.
A solid foundation for this kind of discussion.
Totally. And our mission, like always, is to pull out the most important insights for you, give you that shortcut to being genuinely well informed, and maybe uncover some surprising bits along the way.
Hmm.
To kick us off, here are two quotes from the material that really, I think, set the stage. First, George Orwell. If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear.
Powerful.
And then Harry S. Truman. I never give them hell. I just tell the truth, and they think it's hell.
Okay, that frames it nicely.
Okay, let's unpack this. So here's where it gets, well, really interesting, right? How the lightning fast evolution of technology is challenging and, frankly, reshaping our very definitions of communication.
It really is.
Our deep dive highlights this core concept they call changing paradigms. Historically, different communication technologies, they fell under different legal frameworks for free speech.
Right, like distinct categories.
Exactly. Think about print media, newspapers, magazines. Our sources say they've traditionally enjoyed the strongest free speech protections.
Okay.
Then you've got broadcast, media, TV, radio. They have protections too, but governments often step in more, controlling industry structure, even specific content.
Like Canadian content regulations, maybe? Or restricting certain words?
Precisely. The course notes mention those exact examples. And finally, there are what they call common carriers, like telephone companies.
Ah, the pipes, basically.
Yeah, think of them like the postal service. They deliver the message, but they aren't legally responsible for what's in it. They just carry it.
Okay, that makes sense. So, the crucial point then, as the sources bring up, is where do the new technologies fit?
Exactly. Things that popped up in the last couple of decades. Early bulletin board systems, BBS, remember those?
Oh, yeah.
And of course, the World Wide Web itself. The big question hanging over all this is, do these digital spaces fit neatly into that old print broadcast carrier model?
And what's fascinating, as you said, is the answer seems to be a resounding no. Not really into any single category.
They're kind of in this blurry in-between space.
Which brings us straight to the core principles of free speech itself.
Right.
In Canada, for instance, these are laid out in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, specifically Section 2B. It's pretty
What
broad.
does it say exactly?
It states, everyone has the following fundamental freedoms.
Right.
B, freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and other media of communication.
Comprehensive.
Very. And the whole point of these provisions, in a liberal democracy, is to protect citizens from government overreach.
Stopping the state from telling us what we can or can't say, basically.
Or write, or publish, or assemble peacefully, or believe.
Yeah.
And the interpretations have stretched pretty far over time. They cover offensive ideas, controversial stuff, spoken words, written words.
Obscenity comes up a lot.
Definitely. Obscenity, pictures, art, even commercial speech, like advertising. It's a wide net.
That sounds like a really powerful framework designed to protect people. But, well, as soon as that protection applies to speech, someone finds offensive.
Ah, yes. That's where the theory hits the road, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Those principles suddenly become incredibly thorny in practice.
Our sources mention how Justice Beverly McLaughlin, former Chief Justice here in Canada, summarized the philosophy behind free speech. This
Yeah.
was in the R.V. Keegstra case.
Right, a landmark case. She outlined 4 key motivations, essentially.
Okay, what were they?
First, free speech promotes the free flow of ideas. That's just vital for democracy, for political debate, and it limits the state's ability to mess with other rights.
Makes sense.
Second, it fosters that marketplace of ideas.
Hmm.
The whole concept that truth will eventually win out if different views can compete openly.
The competition of ideas.
Third, she argued it's intrinsically valuable, part of our self-actualization, both for the speaker expressing themselves and the listener engaging with ideas. Personal growth, essentially.
Interesting.
And finally, it's justified simply by the dangers of allowing suppression. History shows governments often restrict expression to hide their own mistakes or control the narrative.
Okay, for pretty compelling reasons. So, what does this mean when those freedoms inevitably clash with content that, well, a lot of people find offensive?
Yeah, the flashpoints.
Our deep dive gives a huge range. political speech, religious speech, pornography, sexual or racial slurs.
Even materials promoting things like Nazism or white supremacy, hateful stuff.
And then there's libel, false, damaging statements, even things maybe less obviously offensive to some, like abortion information or alcohol ads. It's a massive spectrum.
And in Canada, one area that gets a lot of legal attention is defining obscenity, usually applied to sexual content.
How does the law define it?
Our criminal code, section 163(8), defines obscene as any publication a dominant characteristic of which is the undue exploitation of sex or of sex, and any one or more of the following subjects, namely crime, horror, cruelty, and violence.
Okay, that sounds specific, but
But the key word, the one that causes all the debate, as our sources really highlight, is undue.
undue exploitation. What does undue actually mean? That sounds subjective.
Exactly. That's the battleground. It's trying to pin down a community standard that's always shifting. The course notes even try to help by breaking down pornography into types.
Like what?
Well, explicit sex with violence. Explicit sex that might not be overtly violent, but treats people in a degrading or dehumanizing way. And then explicit sex that's none of those things. Not violent, not degrading.
Trying to draw lines in a very difficult area.
Definitely. And Canada's approach, has sometimes been criticized. We take a bit of a different path than other places. Well, in the U.S., for example, it often comes down to community standards. Though courts have struggled to apply that to the internet, obviously.
Because the internet doesn't really have local community standards.
Right. The UK courts look at whether material tends to deprave or corrupt people. Canada, though, tends to focus more on the nature of the material itself, its broad impact, aiming for a kind of national community standard.
A national standard for obscenity. That sounds ambitious.
It is. Less about the specific impact on one individual viewer, more about the overall character of the material across the country.
And we've seen this play out in some pretty public Canadian cases, haven't we?
Oh, absolutely. The sources mentioned the Little Sisters bookstore case in Vancouver, the gay and lesbian bookstore.
What happened there?
Customs kept seizing imported books and magazines, calling them obscene, even though, many of the same materials were sold openly elsewhere.
Seriously?
Yeah. The Supreme Court eventually ruled that Customs had systematically targeted that specific bookstore.
Wow. Okay. Any others?
There was also R. vs. Sharp that involved writings describing sexual acts with children.
Oh, that sounds awful.
Clearly awful. The judge called the acts morally repugnant, but ruled the writings themselves weren't illegal because they didn't actively advocate or counsel readers to actually do those things.
So just writing about it, however horrible, wasn't the same as inciting it.
That was the legal line drawn in that specific case.
Yeah.
It really shows how fine these lines can be.
Which leads us, I guess, to a really critical and, frankly, often emotional area, protecting kids.
Yes. How do we protect children in this digital age? Technology completely changes the game here.
How?
Well, on the web, a child can potentially access the exact same adult text, images, video as any adult. And the person running the website often have no clue how old the user is.
Right, anonymity cuts both ways.
Exactly. Though it's crucial to state our sources are clear. Two things are flat out illegal, no matter the medium: creating, having, or distributing child pornography, and the absolutely abhorrent act of luring children into sexual activity. Those are criminal acts, period.
Okay. But beyond those clear crimes, it gets murky again.
It does. And this raises some incredibly tough questions the course material puts right out there for us, for you listening. How should children be protected from accessing adult material online?
No easy answer to that.
None at all. And maybe even tougher. To what extent is violence on the web or in video games responsible for real-world violence like school shootings? And if there is a link, what should be done?
Wow. Those are huge questions society is still grappling with.
And governments have tried to address parts of this, especially around access to certain content through censorship laws, particularly in the U.S.
Right, I remember some of those attempts.
Yeah, the sources list a few. The Communications Decency Act, CDA, back in '96. That got struck down as unconstitutional pretty quickly. A big early sign the internet wasn't going to fit old rules.
Okay.
Then the Child Online Protection Act, COPA, from '98.
Yeah.
That faced legal challenges and basically got stalled by injunctions.
So not very effective.
Not really. More recently, there's the Children's Internet Protection Act, CPA, from 2002. That one stuck, to a degree. It mandates filters in schools and libraries, if they want federal funding.
Ah, so linking funding to filtering.
Exactly. Now, Canada, interestingly, took a very different tack. The CRTC, that's the Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Commission, made a big splash in 1999.
What did they say?
They basically declared they would not regulate the Canadian internet, and the government at the time accepted that decision. Quite a contrast to the U.S. approach.
So, less top-down regulation here, but what about those filters, like undersea in the US?
Well, filtering software is one approach used widely, especially in U.S. schools and libraries. The sources even mention a Canadian company, Userful.com from Calgary, that provides sepia-compliant filters.
And what do these filters block?
They're designed to block sites with child pornography, obviously, other legally obscene material, and anything deemed harmful to minors.
But filters aren't foolproof, are they? I imagine they can block legitimate stuff too, or miss harmful stuff.
Precisely. Which leads to more critical questions to the source material. What are the problems with filtering software? Overblocking, underblocking. Who decides the criteria?
Yeah.
And another big one. Should search engines give you everything when you search? Or should they deliberately leave out really offensive sites?
Like what kind of sites?
The examples given are things like how-to guides for suicide, or sites with child porn, or even, say, graphic government torture photos. Should those be filtered from search results?
That's a real tension between free access to information and preventing harm, isn't it?
A huge tension.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about some other, maybe related aspects of online expression that are often debated: anonymity and spam.
Two big ones.
Anonymity first. It's not just one thing, is it? Our sources lay out a whole spectrum.
Right. It's nuanced.
There's true anonymity, what they call unlinkability, impossible for anyone to figure out who the author is, which you can see is legally tricky.
Highly problematic for accountability.
Then there's pseudonymity, using a fake name or handle. And even that has variations. It could be public, where everyone knows who's behind the pseudonym.
Or non-public, where maybe only the system administrator knows the real identity.
Or even unlinkable pseudonymity, where not even the service operators know or can find out the link.
Plus, there are specific technologies, like anonymous remailers that strip your return address, or anonymous web browsers that hide your IP and don't track you.
It's interesting, anonymity isn't just a modern internet thing, is it? It has a history.
A long and important one, actually. Think back to the early U.S., the Federalist Papers. Written by Hamilton, Madison, Jay, but all under one name, Publius.
Why did they do that?
To focus attention on the ideas, the arguments for the Constitution, not on the personalities or political factions of the authors.
Interesting. Any other examples?
Oh yeah, 19th century women writers using male pen names to get published to bypass discrimination.
Right, like George Eliot.
Exactly. And even today, the sources mention contemporary women in some Persian Gulf countries using pseudonyms, or Chinese citizens critical of the government doing the same, maybe to protect their families or avoid trouble.
So there are definitely strong arguments for anonymity.
Absolutely. Supporters say it's crucial for privacy and free speech. Think whistleblowers exposing wrongdoing, human rights workers in dangerous places, victims of domestic violence needing to communicate safely, people worried about political or economic payback.
Okay, those are compelling cases.
Yeah.
But then there's the flip side, right? Isn't that same anonymity used for, well, bad things?
That's the core tension. Opponents argue it's inherently antisocial. It lets criminals, fraudsters, harassers, people spreading hate hide from consequences, hide from law enforcement.
And it can poison online conversations, that marketplace of ideas.
Exactly. It can enable terrible online harassment, abuse, fraud, make civil discussion almost impossible sometimes.
So where did that leave us? Is there a middle ground? This leads straight to a really pointed question from our sources. Should there be a law requiring internet service providers, ISPs, to keep records of the real identity of all their users, basically banning true anonymity online?
Wow, that's a huge privacy versus safety debate right there. A really tough call.
Definitely something for you, the listener, to think about. Okay, what about the other shadow?
Ugh, spam. We all know it.
We all get it. Unsolicited mass email. Junk mail, essentially.
And the reason it's everywhere is simple. It's incredibly cheap for the senders to blast out millions of messages.
But it's not cheap for the rest of us, is it?
Not at all. It imposes real costs on recipients, our time sorting through it, sometimes even the cost of our online accounts if quotas are hit.
Plus, the content can be offensive or deceptive.
Often is. And they often use fake return addresses, try to sneak past filters. It's an invasion of privacy, and it puts a massive financial and management strain on ISPs who have to handle all that junk traffic.
Have there been legal challenges? Can you fight back against spam?
Yes, there have been some interesting cases. The sources mention companies like AOL successfully suing spammers back in the day, arguing based on the actual cost the spam imposed on their systems.
Okay, so suing based on tangible harm.
Right. There was also a weird case involving a disgruntled Intel employee who spammed thousands of his colleagues.
Non-commercial spam, just angry emails.
Yeah. A lower U.S. court initially said it was a form of trespass onto Intel's servers, but the California Supreme Court overturned that, saying it wasn't trespass unless it caused actual economic harm to Intel's computer system.
Hmm.
Just annoyance wasn't enough.
Hmm. Another fine legal line. So, given how annoying and costly it is, what are the potential solutions? How do we fight spam?
Our deep dive lists several approaches. Technology is one, obviously better, smarter filters to catch it before it hits your inbox.
Market pressure. What's that?
Things like services that publicly list known spammers, trying to shame them or get ISPs to block them.
Okay. Any other ideas?
Some have proposed a tiny microfee for sending any email, maybe a fraction of a cent. Wouldn't bother normal users, but would make sending millions of spam messages way too expensive.
Interesting idea. Has that ever been tried?
Not widely, no. There are technical and political hurdles. Then, of course, there are anti-spam laws, like the U.S. Can Spam Act from 2004.
Does Canada have something similar?
Not a specific law just for general spam like Can Spam. But our privacy law, PIPEDA, does require consent for commercial email marketing, so that covers some ground.
Right. And the last resort mentioned in the sources?
Well, they even mentioned vigilantism.
Seriously, like what?
Like individuals taking it upon themselves to hack into spammers' systems, maybe delete their mailing lists or shut them down. Obviously legally dubious, but it shows the level of frustration.
Wow. People really hate spam.
Understandably so.
Okay, so if we try to connect all these threads, the changing tech, obscenity, kids online, anonymity, spam, what's the bigger picture? Especially regarding regulation.
Well, you really start to see the huge challenges when technology lets activities cross borders so easily, or when things just don't fit those old regulatory boxes we talked about.
How so?
Our sources draw this interesting parallel. Think about licensed professions.
Hmm.
Doctors, lawyers, engineers, financial advisors.
Yeah.
They're regulated, right? You need qualifications, oversight.
Sure.
Now compare that to the online world. You've got self-help legal software replacing some lawyer functions, or online financial newsletters giving advice, often totally unregulated.
Yeah. That raises questions about quality, reliability, accountability.
Exactly. Which leads to a very practical question the Course Notes posed directly to you, the listener. Would you buy prescription medications from an online pharmacy?
Ooh, that really brings it home, doesn't it? The trust issue, the regulation gap, the potential risk.
It really does. And it highlights what the sources call the global net paradox. The internet can be this amazing tool to avoid censorship. Because it's global, restrictions in one country can often be bypassed by using networks or hosting sites in less restrictive countries, often the U.S. historically.
Right. Information finds a way.
But at the same time, the internet can be a powerful tool to establish censorship globally, or at least to impose one nation standards on others.
How's that work?
Think about a global platform like eBay. The sources mentioned they ban selling certain things, like hate group memorabilia, maybe because it's illegal or deeply offensive in, say, Germany, even if it might be technically legal to sell in the U.S. The platform adopts a standard influenced by stricter regulations elsewhere.
So the global reach forces a kind of harmonization, sometimes towards more restriction.
It can, yeah. It's that tension again. The net as both liberating and potentially controlling.
Which really brings us to looking ahead. How do we ensure the internet remains a space for valuable, diverse content, not just, commerce and noise?
And the course material finishes with a series of really crucial, forward-looking questions. These aren't easy ones.
Okay, let's hear them. What should we be thinking about?
Is there a good balance right now between commercial stuff and educational information on the web? Or is commerce dominating?
Good question.
And related. Should diverse content, maybe non-commercial, cultural, educational, be subsidized with public money, with taxes, to make sure it exists and thrives online?
Wow, subsidizing websites. That's provocative.
Another big one. Should telecom providers be allowed to offer tiered internet service, letting content providers pay more for faster delivery?
The net neutrality debate, still raging.
Exactly. And then thinking about public good. Do we need to actively ensure there are reliable sites with civic information, local government info, voting info, that kind of thing?
Like a public service mandate for the internet.
Perhaps. And finally, Are more sites needed that promote the arts and culture? Is that aspect getting lost in the shuffle?
Those are definitely not simple questions with easy yes-no answers.
Not at all. They point to ongoing debates about what we want the internet to be.
What an incredible deep dive this has been. It's just so clear that technology is constantly pushing and pulling at our understanding, our application of these fundamental free speech principles.
Absolutely. Those old lines, print, broadcast, carrier, they're not just blurred anymore. They feel almost dissolved sometimes in the digital world.
And the debates over what's offensive, what's obscene, they just keep evolving. Concepts like anonymity, dealing with spam, protecting vulnerable people online, it's all changing so fast.
It really is a moving target.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on, building on everything we've discussed from the sources. Considering the internet's truly global reach and these wildly different national standards and laws we've touched on, how effectively can any single country truly regulate online expression anymore?
Hmm.
And what does that sheer complexity, that global reality mean for the future of free speech, not just in one place, but on a planetary scale?
That is the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it?
Something to think about until our next deep dive.